Do you remember every card in Hearthstone? Now, I don't mean like, could you write them all out on a list and name all of them? I mean, if you saw a card, would you be like, oh, yeah, 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 I remember that card? Or would you have that moment of hesitation where you say, wait a minute, that's a real card? Well, despite, me doing this for 5 years and talking about Hearthstone cards every day, I realized there are still some cards that give me that hesitation where I say, hey, wait a minute, that's a real card. What is that? So I went through the entire Hearthstone collection and I identified a bunch of cards here that gave me that pause that I had to rethink, like, what's the effect of that? What's the stat line, where it just wasn't inherently obvious to me what that card was. Of course, I've seen them all before, reviewed half of them, but it still gave me that moment where I was like, that's a card, huh? So I thought it'd be fun to spotlight those and in the future play some decks centered around the cards on this list and perhaps other cards you guys think most people will have forgotten, but perhaps for some reason or another, you remember that one specifically. That said, this video is sponsored by Keeps, so thanks to them for making this possible. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on in the video. But for now, let's jump into some of these forgotten Hearthstone cards. So up first here, let's talk about Wing Commander. This is a neutral card from Descent of Dragons, and it's still in standard format, so you'd think it'd be popping up fairly regularly off of random summon effects. But I feel like I've seen this card like maybe once or twice since it came out. It's got an incredibly generic name. The effect is limited to specifically dragon synergy builds, which frankly we haven't seen that many of. The artwork's kind of cartoony and goofy and generic. So all in all, it's a completely forgettable card, despite being, in all things considered, a pretty new one. Moving on here to Reaver, a card apparently from the Grand Tournament. And I kind of remember this one after looking at it, but even then I was like, man, really? This could have been submitted in a custom card video, and I 100% would have believed it was a custom card. It's got that Boulder Fist Ogre stat line, and it has a whirlwind effect when it's drawn. Of course, that's just way too slow. You need a lot more control over your whirlwind effects, knowing exactly when they're going to happen. And then the 6/7 body upside's not that great. So there's really no reason to play this card. I can't remember anybody ever playing it in a real deck. I mean, I'm sure it popped up in Arena and it was halfway okay sometimes because stats mattered back then and still in some ways do. But, it's, again, a fairly generically named card. The artwork's actually pretty sick looking, so the artwork's nice. But all in all, like many Grand Tournament cards, kind of just fell to the wayside immediately and never really came back up. Next up here, Master of Ceremonies. Now, I'm surprised I forgot this card looking at the artwork here, but it's apparently another Grand Tournament card, a 4/2 for 3 mana. A bit of a weird stat line there we don't see very often, so that's odd. And it's a spell damage synergy card. We've had a lot of those lately, but they were all the way back in Grand Tournament. And she would gain +2/+2 if you had a minion with spell damage, so she'd be a 6/4, which is actually pretty intimidating for 3 mana. I mean, 4 health still fairly easy to deal with, but you could think that there's like a spell damage deck that utilizes this as a high pressure minion that could exist right now, given all the other spell damage synergy stuff. So I'm kind of excited to eventually test this one out in some kind of spell damage mage or something. Seems like she could be a big body on board and a big threat. But frankly, I had to really refresh myself. For some reason, I thought she had something to do with like death rattle silencing or something when I first saw her. I don't know why that is, but I had it totally wrong. I never could have told you the effect or stat on this card if you showed me the name or the artwork. So this one was completely lost to me. Moving on here to the Blubber Baron from Mean Streets of Gadgetzan. This is a Battle Cry synergy card. Whenever you summon a Battle Cry minion while this is in your hand, gain +1/+1. I vaguely remember doing some stuff with this, but given all the crazy stuff that came out in Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, I don't remember this ever being competitively relevant. It's not a card that would pop up in Arena much. Probably a throwaway if it gets randomly evolved into. It's a low roll and stuff, so you just don't think about this one very often. It's an epic card, so not a lot of people would have been crafting this one to goof off. And, even nowadays, like, I feel like it'd be pretty hard to build around because it has to be in hand to get its buff effect, which might be difficult to do despite all the battle cry shenanigans out there. So, it's a cool looking card. It's like a, walrus with some coins. That's fun and stuff, but definitely not one I thought about much. And it really took me a minute to remember. At first, I thought this was the the card that buffed 1/1s when you played them, but it's not that card. I can't even think of that card's name right now, so perhaps it should be on the list as well. But yeah, Blubber Baron, pretty darn forgettable. Skeletonite here cheated a little bit because this popped up in a wild game for me recently, and I was like, oh my god, Skeletonite. I totally blanked on this card. Completely forgot about it. It's another Grand Tournament card, which clearly there are a lot of those that were quite forgettable. And the thing is here, right, it's a 7/4. And when I played this, I was like, oh man, I'm going to win the Joust and I'm going to get a 7/4 on board. That's pretty sick. That makes this like, you know, a cairn that can go infinite. And then the moment of realization hit, you don't get a 7/4 on board when it dies. It gets returned to your hand. You have to replay it. It's miserable. You have to spend 6 mana over and over again on a 7/4. So yeah, an infinite resource, but a terribly slow one with no real stickiness at all. The artwork on this is kind of cool. You get a crazy skeleton. It's a little bit more cartoony than we've seen in some cases, but I dig it. It looks awesome. It's just really, really low power level card for a legendary. Pretty generic too, because it isn't like a name or anything. It's literally just the Skeleton Knight, which I think might be a World of Warcraft thing. I know the Black Knight is, but I don't really know the Skeleton Knight, I guess. So just adding the to it to make it feel legendary in my mind, I don't know if that goes very far. So yeah, a legendary that's very, very easy to forget. Moving on here to the Lucky Do Buccaneer. That's a name of a card. It's a 6-mana 5/5 for a rogue from Mean Streets again. And artwork's really, really busy here. Some kind of crazy pirate treasure chest octopus thing. It's cool. I mean, I like it. I'd like to look a little closer at it. But I do vaguely remember trying to like play this in a weapon rogue as like kind of a big mid-game threat where you drop a 9/9 and stuff, but it never worked and we didn't try very hard. And that's because it's a really, really slow card for pirates and weapon builds. I mean, there might be something cool here with Self-Sharpening Sword, though. So this is another one that could be really fun to try to play again now that it's a forgotten card. But for now, yeah, I mean, I just could not remember this one at all. Next up here is Light's Sorrow, a card which I sort of rediscovered while talking about some of the worst cards ever. I noticed this one and I was like, oh yeah, that card was terrible, but I couldn't remember its cost or its stats. I mean, I really had to dig in to remember what this card was about. And even now, like, God, I've thought about this while preparing the video, and I don't even remember what it is now. I still can't tell you what it is because it's just so miserable and boring. So I'm reading it right now. After a friendly minion loses Divine Shield, gain +1 attack. So it's like a Divine Shield synergy weapon, you know. It's hard to make things lose Divine Shield. There's just not that many Divine Shields at any given moment. So getting this up to like the 3 or 4 attack where it gets really exciting is slow. It takes time. That said, I mean, you know, if you play enough Divine Shields over the course of a game, this could get up to a pretty high attack value, which might be pretty nifty. It just takes a long time. So another one I'm excited to try. It looks pretty cool from an artwork standpoint. Oh, it's from Knights of the Frozen Throne, by the way. So there's a lot of cool stuff in that expansion. No wonder this one did not stand out at all. But excited to give this one a shot. But for now, super, super forgettable card. I can't even remember it after studying it. Next up here is Gaslowe from Goblins versus Gnomes. This was one that I kind of did a double take on because I was like, oh, this really looks like a custom card. Like the way the artwork is positioned, it looks like it's just artwork from Heroes of the Storm. I'm pretty sure it looks a lot like the Heroes of the Storm portrait for Gaslowe, which I knew Gaslowe really well in Heroes. I don't remember him as well in Hearthstone. I wasn't really making content quite yet in Goblins versus Gnomes. I was playing the game, but not making content yet. So I of course remembered him once I saw him, but I couldn't have told you his effect for $1 million, you know, off memory. Couldn't have told you his stat line or his cost. It all feels very random and like a 3/6 or 6 mana, random mechs added to hand. It's a cool design in some ways, but kind of disjointed and, you know, like just a bunch of random components added together. I don't know how they synergize with Gaslowe at all. I mean, I know it's like spare parts and stuff play into it, but in that case, why wasn't it like when you cast a spare part? I don't know. So just, I thought it was Heroes of the Storm custom card more than a real Hearthstone card when it comes down to it. Moving on here to Rostakon's Rumble. It's Savage Striker. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm like reading these cards even now. I can't do them from memory. It's a 2-mana 2/3 battlecry. Deal damage to an enemy minion equal to your hero's attack. So it's like the card Savagery, which frankly is one of the most forgettable classic or basic cards. Savagery exists. That's a thing. But it's been put on a stick here with a minion Savage Striker. And man, this card does not stand out. Like the artwork's good, but it just looks very generically Rosticon-y, troll, dinosaur stuff. It doesn't really pop at all to me. The name is referential, but also very, very subtle. And the effect, as we know, is pretty easy to dismiss. I actually thought this had a little bit more opportunity with cards like Pounce, but it turns out that kind of demanding tempo play there never worked for Druid because it's like 2 cards to kind of barely swing the board in the early game, which just didn't ever find its way into a deck, and therefore Savage Striker very quickly did not find its way into our brains. Next up here is Shopcopter, a card which, to be fair, I remember a little bit better just because it's super recent from Galakrond's Awakening, and I remember this got like kind of leaked, and I was like guessing the name of it based on translations and stuff, which was fun. But as far as like seeing this card in the game, I don't know if I've ever seen it. We try to put it in a deck, but beyond that, I don't know if I've ever seen it in a game. And I have a feeling a lot of you are going to be the same way, because a lot of people just didn't buy Galakrond's Awakening and didn't get access to these cards, so it just like doesn't pop into random stuff all that often. It's a totally forgettable card. I do remember some of you arguing that it was going to be awesome and telling me I was insane for giving it like a low review score. Joke's on you, first off. Rarely. This is not me bragging, but one time I get one. And it's clearly never seen play at all because mechs fell out pretty fast, and given the standard format rotation where we lost Boomsday Project, but even before that, converting tempo into value is not a thing Hunter likes particularly well, so Shopcopter just didn't quite get there. And in the meantime, I forgot it ever existed at all. Next up here is the Toxic Arrow. Yeah, Knights of the Frozen Throne card. You can almost kind of barely see Icecrown Citadel there in the background of this card. It's 2 mana spell, deal 2 damage to a minion. If that survives, give it poisonous. I don't know what the point of this card was. You gotta hurt your own thing to give it poisonous, or sometimes it's like a bad removal spell of your opponent's stuff. I don't know how you were supposed to use this. It seems really, really terrible. I don't often think it's great to play your own thing, and then, I mean, it's kind of like a removal spell if you have a minion on board, but only if the minion has 3 or more health that can survive the Toxic Arrow. And it's like, man, I feel like just Hunter's Mark is better in that regard in most cases, right? So I don't know why this card was made. It's so generic in its name. Even its artwork is it's literally just an arrow with some green goop around it. And flavor-wise, it doesn't feel particularly Icecrown Citadel or Frozen Throne-y. It doesn't feel like Deathstalker Rexar-ish to me. So, yeah, it never got played that I'm aware of, and I totally blanked on it existing at all. All right, so before we go on to our last card, which I guarantee you forgot existed, it's far and away the most forgettable card of all time in Hearthstone. Before we get to that one, I do want to shout out our sponsor for this video, Keeps. Yeah, if you didn't know, 2 out of 3 guys will suffer some form of male pattern baldness by the time they're 35. I'm creeping up on that number. I know from YouTube stats, a lot of you are as well. And the best way to prevent hair loss is to do something about it while you still have some. And the good news is you can get treated from home. Talk to a doctor online, get the medication sent straight to you. That's perfect for this world we're in right now. So if you're noticing that you're losing your hair, do something about it. For a limited time, you can go to keeps.com/Regis or click the link down there in the description below, and you'll get 50% off your first order. All right, I know what you guys are here for. You just want to see me comb my hair. I get it. Regis Hair Combing, sponsored by Keeps. So, let's talk about the last card here. The Wii Spellstopper. No, this is not a joke. No, you're not being trolled. This is legitimately a real Hearthstone card. It's from Goblins vs. Gnomes. It's a mage card. It's a 2/5 for 4 mana. And it reads, adjacent minions can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. This is just demonstrably so much worse than the new card, Robes of Protection, that's a neutral, that's cheaper, almost the exact same stat line, and it affects your entire board. So from a quality standpoint, it's pretty clear Wii Spellstopper makes 0 sense. Beyond that, the name feels a little bit odd. Just kind of like the word Wii. I mean, it fits, it's fine, she's a gnome, but it feels a little strange. The artwork is like anime art. It's like manga art. It's not even Hearthstone styling. So that feels super out of place. It very much looks like a custom card somebody made with artwork that doesn't actually belong in the game. The artwork is framed weird. It's like she's like kind of off center for no reason that I can determine. It doesn't read well at scale. It's like got awkward color contrast with like the red background and her pink hair. It's also got like some blue background elements with her blue robe. So it's just like a messy, awkward, poor mechanic, totally unplayed card that looks as fake as any Hearthstone card I've ever seen. And that's to me why you have to say this one is 100% a forgettable, forgotten Hearthstone card. And there you go. That wraps it up for our forgotten Hearthstone cards. Let me know in the comments, how many of these did you remember? And I don't mean did you remember they existed, but if I said, see Reaver, could you tell me its cost, its class, its stats, and its effect? Or even maybe like one of those? Or would you be like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. What was that card? Maybe you're an encyclopedia of Hearthstone cards. Also, I'm curious, what cards out there do you think other people have forgotten? Obviously, you can't name cards you forgot because you don't remember them, but is there any card you think that's really awkward or weird? Because we might do a follow-up video, and beyond that, I'd like to start a video series where we put some of these cards into play, testing them out, building decks around them, seeing if we can make these forgotten cards memorable in one way or another. That said, looking forward to all those comments down below. Thanks very much for watching, and until next time, game on.